And China pledges nearly $250 million to jumpstart biodiversity protection in developing nations. And for more on this story, Dr. Jackson Ewing from Duke University joins us. Dr. Ewing, more than $230 million to support biodiversity protection in developing countries. Is that a significant investment by Beijing?
Compared to other great powers in the world, it is a fairly paltry sum. We see investments coming out of countries like France and Germany in the 4 to 5 billion range. We've seen philanthropic commitments to biodiversity in recent days total some 5 billion, with 1 billion alone coming from the Bezos Fund. But I think that we should acknowledge two things when contextualizing that commitment. One is that China, as a developing country, has fewer spelled out commitments to invest in biodiversity protection abroad compared to its developed country great power counterparts. And secondly, and more importantly, China's actions on things like infrastructure development, international trade, and supply chain management will ultimately be far more important for biodiversity outcomes than the amount that it invests in biodiversity efforts in its own right.
So, Dr. Ewing, a small sum, comparatively speaking, but Xi Jinping has said that China is going to take the lead on biodiversity protection and support developing nations in this regard. What does he need to do then?
It's important to note that China has made some important progress and some important commitments on biodiversity at home. This includes creating ecological red lines for protecting sensitive ecosystems and the ecosystem services that they provide for the Chinese people. There are many questions remaining about how those projects will be executed. One of the important statements to come out of the Biodiversity Convention that's ongoing right now from China has to do with its commitment to integrate ecological and biodiversity issues into its economic development planning. No easy task to do comprehensively, but that will be important for China to meet those domestic objectives, as will its ongoing effort to create an ambitious national park system in the country that covers many of those sensitive biodiversity zones. Internationally, China is, of course, a major investor in transportation infrastructure, in energy infrastructure, in the industrialization of many countries, not only in its near abroad in Asia, but further afield in Africa and Latin America. China's greatest contribution to biodiversity would be to ensure that those investments do not go through critical biodiversity zones and are sensitive to their environmental impacts.
On the climate front, President Xi has vowed to accelerate the development of renewable energy in China, but it recently stepped up coal production because of its energy crisis. Is China making any progress then to cut emissions?
Certainly, China is facing a near-term crisis in energy access and energy stability, which reveals the need to have a transition to a clean energy future that's built not on fossil fuels, but rather on the next generation of a combination of nuclear, hydro, solar, wind, and a massive upgrade in the management of its electricity grid, a massive upgrade in its storage capabilities, and ultimately improvements to the efficiency of how those grids are able to deliver power to consumers, both at the household level and industrial levels. It's no easy task, and I think that the current energy crisis could be viewed as a short-term setback for those efforts, but the trend lines are relatively clear. China is investing heavily in rolling out those new technologies. The question remains as to how much coal will continue to be built in the years to come. At what level will coal production plateau? And at what point will it ultimately begin to decline at a significant level? For it to meet its climate change commitments, which is to peak carbon emissions before 2030 and reach carbon neutrality by 2060, that sort of rollback of coal will need to accelerate rapidly in the mid-2020s.
All right, thanks so much for your thoughts this evening. And Dr. Jackson Ewing, Senior Fellow at Duke University.